school-going children caught in different kinds of situations that would be rather not very desirable for parents. And let me see. Ambani says negatively without explaining why or how. Yes, it does. This is Koa Frederick who says, yes, it does. Mike, personally, there is a way to relate more with people who are media and technology aware than one who is ignorant or the realities. Okay. We have Julius Baswetti who says the media shapes human character directly. As a teacher, I can authoritatively say that parents are more interested in their jobs and businesses than molding the character of their children. This mentorship gap is filled by the media. Parental guidance is crucial. I'll read one more. I don't think so. This is Salim Hasio, who says it's the media alone, but rather a combination of factors, including parents abdicating their parental roles. Would love to hear what your take is, and we'll also have the phone lines open to hear what you have to say. And of course, would like to have direction on this and partly find out what your thoughts are in regards to that. But this morning, I am joined by Elias Mokua, Dr. Elias Mokua, who is a lecturer at the university and on media studies. And Dr. Mokua, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with just that basic question as to whether the media actually does influence how we behave as human beings.
Well, the question is so much not whether media influences or not, but to what extent does media influence?
Correct.
Because media is not the only source of influence in our lives. We have families, we have community, we have, many other sources of influence. So media is just but one of the many sources of influence. And so in regard to this morning debate, it's really the excuse me. It's really the extent to which media can have negative influence. It's not so much like is everything dependent on media, almost like want to kill this media. Like if we did away with the media, our children would be very, morally right, as if in the past, away from the media, everything was right. I think it's more than media. Yes, media do have an influence, but it has a limitation.
And it's also a combination of various social aspects that we grow up. We are socialized. But in your opinion, do you think that media's influence has grown over years? Because access to it has become so huge.
Well, over years, yes, of course, yes, in terms of what we consume from the media. We live in a media-saturated society. We receive a lot of information from the media. Now young people have social media platforms. All of us, in one way or another, we just depend on media to know what's happening, to know what's not happening as well. We know very well that media, especially in terms of formation of attitude and character, we know that this doesn't happen overnight. It's the kind of media consumption we engage in. If you watch certain programs, whether they are soap operas, whether they are from Hollywood movies or Nigerian movies, they kind of take an influence in us slowly, the so-called pole. It does just happen overnight. Yes, we do know that especially the social media platforms are available for many young people, even for adults. So it can have a certain influence in our attitudes, in our behavior. But as I said, we can't just say it's only media that will influence us. There are other factors. There are, the way families are growing nowadays, their roles in society, what kind of values are young people espousing, which means what kind of values are adults, are parents really thinking these are the best for our families, because kids pick from parents, kids pick from teachers,
they learn from what
they learn from society. So it's not just about the young people only, it's also about what's happening at the top. The same way we look at politics at the top. The way politics is played also influences the way the grassroots behave.
And that then would beg the question of course, we tend to think that media influences more the youth than the older generation, but that is not true. We also have a huge influence on the older generation by the media.
Yeah. I mean, it's always a kind of fallacy. I agree totally with you that we tend to think that media influence the young people than the adults. But remember, it's because we don't measure a lot of influence on adults more than we do with young people, because we are all concerned with their future, their character, what they know, what they want to do, and what we want them to do, to learn, to be. But the adults get really influenced. And sometimes we adults are the ones who believe in media more than actually the young people. Young people can question, can raise substantial questions on several aspects of life. But it's important to underline that in terms of especially values, moral values, the young people can also be influenced negatively. I think it's important to underline that.
And I'd want us to also just concentrate on that particular word you've just used, negatively, because that's where now we have a problem in society. And looking at our moral values today, and this is world over, it's not just a uniquely Kenyan problem, they seem to have taken a dip. Let's take an example of students, possibly who have been caught, doing things that parents would be very ashamed to find their own students there, their own, children there. For instance, binge drinking or in sexual orgies. Do you think this is a direct influence from what they see in the media, access to maybe, for instance, pornographic material that was not that accessible? I remember when I was growing up, that was something you would not access, that easily. Today, it's accessible. Even a 10-year-old, literally, can look at pornographic material. Is that directly media that is, influencing them that way? Or is it because of also our change in how we do things, how we bring up our children? Parents are so busy. The children are brought up either by phones or by television or by films. What has tipped the scale?
Well, it's a mixture of everything, really. But let's look, first of all, at the word you used. Is it direct? I think to some extent, a small extent, is direct. But as I said, we have what we call media culture. And it's a theory that's very well expounded by Douglas Kellner, where we learn that media actually influences slowly. We don't wake up knowing that we've been influenced. The same way hair grows on our head. You don't wake up and realize that now it has grown this much. You just realize that the hair is growing without really my control, and it's the same way. So really, it's very difficult to say that there's a direct influence. To some, yes, to some extent. But, the fact that young people have access to social media platforms so they can access pornography or see what other people are doing, that if they see that, it may have a direct influence. But let's go back to the basics. The basics are these. What kind of society are we today? What should I call them? The sexual content in itself will not influence a kid with strong moral values. In fact, some kids will stay away. So there is a way in which we, as a society, have redefined what is sexuality. It has become something we are at home with. Because if you go back to our traditional society where there was no media, the roles and identities of young people were very clear. The boys were here, the girls were here. Now, the media has brought all this together. So I can access, this content without my parent knowing, without my sister knowing. And so there's a way in which I learn a little more. But having said that, it's important to wonder whether we adults are not aware of that reality so that we can address it. It's as if we are saying, because of social media platforms, and because young people can access these contents, therefore it's influencing them and we're helpless. That kind of fatalism is really where the problem is. If you're an adult and you know that your kid is having access to, then the question is, what are you doing about it? So otherwise we seem to say, okay, they have access, it's so difficult. I don't know, that kind of helplessness.
And we have social media, we have what is called mainstream media, which is now maybe like what we are on, the platform we are on right now, and the visual images that keep being thrown out there, basically on all those platforms. How do we rescue or arrest that, given that parents have also been caught in the same cycle as the young ones?
First of all, we are not going, it is where we're headed. It will be very difficult to say that we will do away with social media. So we are going to live with it. Yes, this is where this is technological
I think we should
advancement.
be looking at more responsible use
Yeah,
of it.
exactly. There's so much good that also comes from these platforms, where there's mainstream media, and you're talking about from 10 to 12, to maybe 4 or 5 when kids are asleep, and so adults are also consuming this mainstream adult content, if you will. We're going to live with it. I think that's the first point. It's not going to change. The gadgets are here, the televisions are here. We're going to have to live with it. Number 2, we need to realize that kids can change. Most of these kids, the example you gave, of young people involved in in behavior that we think is morally not right. I think it's important to know that we as a society need to begin to think about how do we bring up young people, especially in the area of sexuality. Most of these teens, especially the teens, the stage they are in psychological, they are in a stage of identity construction. And they are looking to identify who they are in terms of physical appearance, in terms of knowing biologically what's happening to them. And so it's very easy for them to see something, say like the pornography content, and try it. For them, since they are forming identity, it's very easy to try out things. What I saw, does it work in real life?
Right.
And so the only person who is going to help this young person is the teacher, is the father, is, a guardian.
Yes.
It's going to be someone else other than this young person. The other point I like to emphasize is that young people are in a stage where they can't make informed decisions. They can make a decision, they can't even consent with each other, but that doesn't constitute an informed decision. What do we mean by that? The act, for them, this is especially the sexual moral side of it. It's pleasurable, it's exciting, it's fun, it's something you want to try. It has triumph, it has heroes, If it's boys, the more girls you chase, you become a hero of some sort. But there are consequences. Those consequences is not when the teacher catches you and beats you up. It's really what happens when in your 30s, when you're in your 40s, when you're in your 50s.
Absolutely. I want us to bring in Ezekiel Mutua, who is the Kenya Film and Classification Board CEO. On this, he's been very vocal on trying to clamp down on material, especially on mainstream media, even in film. And let me start from the question of whether you feel that media has so far negatively influenced our moral value and fibre, Ezekiel Mutua.
Yes, Mike.
Yes, good morning and thank you for joining us. And the question is, how much do you think the media has influenced our moral fibre to be where we are today?
Yes, Mike, and I think, first of all, let me apologize for not being there and thank Dr. Mukwe. I think he has tackled that subject very well. Yes, the media is a double-edged sword. It has both benefits, but also, if not well managed, it can have serious implications, particularly on our children. It can have negative impact. And I think to the extent to the context of today, it is a balancing act. It has both good benefits, but it has negative effects. What we need to look at is how do we balance, how do we get the media to become what it was supposed to be, to inform, to educate, to entertain, in a context where our kids do not consume bad content. That's where regulation comes in, that work that we do. to ensure that we are able to guide the children, to classify films and broadcast content, programs, and guide the viewers, particularly impressionable minds, to know this program is rated GE. It means it is suitable for family viewing or general viewing. It is marked PG. Parental guidance is required. If marked this age, do not watch if you are below that age. And the whole thing is about discipline, and all of us working together, parents and guardians, ensuring that they instill discipline and moral values in their children. I don't think we can blame the media for every negative thing that is going on in society. So my take is, just to repeat what Dr. Mukua said, yes, there are benefits, but there are also negative things, but it's also, we must also understand that the media is part of society. The media reflects, it's a mirror, it reflects what is going on in society. We cannot just look at the media alone, much as it has so much influence. We must look at the entire conversation in society.
All right, and how far is too far for you with the Kenya Film Classification Board in terms of regulating and gauging what people have to watch? And, you know, we'll take an example even of a film that was banned in Kenya. And of course, the question was, at what point do you regulate, and at what point do you let people make that decision? Because at the end of the day, it is not just, like you've said, the media that influences, but people, parents especially, need to be responsible as well. All right, I don't know if we still have Ezekiel Mutua. All right, maybe as we try and raise him, same question. At what point do we regulate, and how far do we go with regulation? Because here we are now sometimes blaming the media, but the question is, there's also the, individual responsibility. They say charity begins at home.
Yeah.
And like you'd mentioned earlier, if a child is brought up in a certain way, they would make a decision for themselves at the appropriate age that I should not watch this, or I'm not comfortable to watch this.
Yeah. It's important to emphasize, of course, the regulation or the kind of communication policies we have in place for what any kind of category or each category of society can consume. That's important. Young people cannot be exposed just because we think they can make a decision. If a movie is running, unless you tell a kid this is not, good for you, they will sit and watch, and that's very dangerous because they are forming their mind. This is an age in which images, what they hear, the kind of voices they hear, shape whom they think they should be, whom they think they should, they are. A perfect example is to look at the players, the football players in the Premier League, or, the stars, global stars, the Messis, Ronaldos, and so on. Those guys are under very, very strict discipline, because what they do can influence thousands and millions of young people. And it's the same principle we can borrow. What young people have access to can influence what they think they are. Now, remember when a teenager or a child is watching this content, they are not seated there thinking that it's a bad thing. And even when they know it's a bad thing, they want to explore. So regulation comes in to say, we're not saying you can't make a decision to watch. We are not saying that it's going to affect you, you watch and die, or you watch and run out to do something. All we're saying is important to regulate so that at the right time, at an appropriate time of your life, you can watch this content. So there is an extent to which regulation helps, but let's also look at the problem of regulation. You can't police people.
Correct.
Moral policing is always a problem. And I agree with Dr. Ezekiel Mutua completely. Put the emphasis on parenting. The emphasis in society. The emphasis is on media awareness that you are destroying the future of these young people. The young people will have fun, they will enjoy it, just like someone who enjoys drink until they realize that their eyes have gone off. It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
All right, I think we have Dr. Ezekiel Mutua on phone. And same question, Dr. Ezekiel Mutua. How far do we go with regulation? Because at what point do we now take over the responsibility of a mature adult? All right,
Hello?
I'll ask. Yeah, go on.
Yes, yes. I think for adults, we give advisory. We're just supposed to show the classifiable elements. If it's about nudity or foul language, we just guide them to know the kind of content that they are consuming. Adults have a right to choose what they want to watch. For children, it's different. Children must be guided. Children must get the support of all of us. They must know that, there's what is appropriate for children because of their impressionable minds, and the content that they watch impacts their lives, their thinking. It can impair their moral judgment. And so for children, it's very different. For adults, we guide them. We just give advisory. The thing is,
But when we look at a film like Rafiki, you
make it clear to our children that even when a child is born, you don't feed them on githeri. There is food that's suitable, that is right for children. Then as their development, they develop in their bodies and minds, they grow to start consuming different things. And that's the same way the mind works. That once a child is born, they are fed on certain food so that their bodies and their faculties can function in a certain way, not the same way with adults. And I think the issue of regulation is very important. It's not unique to Kenya. Every country in the world has challenges of regulation. And regulation is not about popularity. So it's about doing what is right. It's about sticking to the law. People go to elections every 5 years. We elect leaders, members of parliament, enact laws, and we follow those laws. We enforce those laws for the good of society. And there should be no conflict between the regulators and the broadcasters or the film industry and our consumers. We all should work together to build a better society, a society that is governed by moral values and the rule of law, because a society becomes easier to interact. Human interactions become more beneficial, constructive, and useful when people have a sense of right and wrong. So saying don't watch this because the law says this is not putting a caveat to undermining people's freedoms, particularly when it comes to children and what they consume. Because what they consume has an impact on them. And I think the emphasis that we need to put right now is having a conversation, rather than a debate that focuses on us versus them. Let us have a conversation as society and ask ourselves, where did the water start beating us? We grew up in this society. Yeah, we didn't have the technologies we have, the multiplicity of media channels, the phones and the gadgets, but we also had our own fun, and we could also have been given to mischief. But we didn't, because we respected parents, we respected authority, and we followed certain ethos and the cultures in society. And we turned out fine. Let us talk to our children and tell them they will not die if they don't watch the phone. The TV. They will not die if they do not watch pornography. That there is a time for everything. Unless we bring that kind of discipline and have a conversation, and the guide kids to know that laws are not there to destroy them. Regulation is not there to destroy them. There is a time and a season for everything. And guide them in the fear of God, respect for instituted authority, following the laws and having a discipline. That's the only way they can become responsible members of society. This conversation should not be about do's and don'ts. It should be about what is right and what is wrong. How can we make you better? How do we follow the law to ensure that everybody has their space, government does their work, parents do their work, the media themselves. You also need your own code of regulation and follow the law as well.
All right, and the question that I'd like to ask you, Dr. Mutua, before we let you go is, you've mentioned advisory for adults, but if we look at an example, the film that was banned recently, Rafiki, that was not an advisory, that was a ban. That's basically saying none of you can watch it in Kenya. It's illegal to watch it in Kenya, whereas what you're saying is that with adults, there needs to be an advisory that this is content of this kind. You make a choice whether to watch it or not. Don't you think then that sometimes we cross that line, or you cross that line? All right, and there seems to be a delay there. So do you think that the KFCB sometimes, or regulators generally, we don't want to look at this at just one agency, but do you think generally there is that crossing of the line when it comes to regulating? Because for adults, really, they should already have reached a mature age of making a decision whether you want to watch this or not.
I think it depends on where that content is available. For example, if you go to a website, you can watch anything. Some of them are really horrible. I mean, even saying that depends on where I come from, you know. But some of the content online is quite, you know, something to take depending on where you come from. So you can watch anything. It depends on where is it. For example, there are films I can say, you know, you can't put them in a public, you know, somewhere in a public forum. Yeah, there are some that will be good for people who want, you know, certain stuff. Let them watch on some website, some corner where only themselves know what kind of pleasure they derive or gratification they derive from that. So in such a cases, it depends on where is this movie supposed to be watched, or where should it not be watched. Overall, an adult will have their own, you know, decision whether to access it or not. The problem is, can you control that access? Now, you asked a good question. If you go to the West, these issues are very serious, and I can understand why Dr. Ezekiel Mutua is struggling, because we don't have that culture of control. In the West, even your words, the words you use to speak to a teenager, how you hold a kid, how you look at a kid, even adults to adults. Someone can just accuse you, you've harassed me by looking at me in a certain way. Right. The movies, they are really classified. And if you choose one, the responsibility lies with you. So I think we're struggling because we probably are beginning to realize that morals are important, and now we're struggling between freedom and moral guidance. We're breaking from our traditional communities where these were very clear. We're getting into a very tense, you know, position in terms of what's good for me, you know, may not be good for you, but I'm free, you shouldn't be free. So really, I want to say one thing, that it's important to realize responsibility, whether for adults or for young people, though young people must be accompanied, is really on what is a moral good for me, for society. And not just for me, what's good for me should also be good for other people.
All right, I'll come back to you for your closing comments, but let me have Dr. Mutua possibly give us his closing remarks, and possibly what we need to do, especially as Kenyans and as a society, to ensure, because the media is not going anywhere anytime soon. Dr. Mutua, what do you see as the way forward to ensure that we still maintain our moral fabric and fiber?
Okay. I think like Dr. Mukua said, we need to have a national conversation on moral values, a national conversation on what kind of country we want, a national conversation on how to make our youth and our children more responsible adults when they grow up. And that conversation needs to be sector driven. It cannot be the work of the regulator alone, or the government, or the parents. We need to combine forces and come together and say, we have one country. We are a country that needs to be governed by the rule of law. Your freedom has limits. There is no freedom that is absolute. And media regulation is just part of the law. You're asking about banning of a movie. If the banning is in the law, let's not debate it. It is in the law. Why do you think the judge did not give an open blanket and say the film should be shown? Because the ban is in the law. Otherwise, we would have been sued by everybody. The thing is, we have a culture of lawlessness. A very indisciplined society. We misbehave as adults. We are not good models and examples to our children. Even you, the media, you want to bring sideshows and discussions that create more confusion than understanding. Like that issue, you keep coming back to one film. We have licensed over 500 films in 1 year. We banned only one, but that's what you talk about, Mike. Every morning you call me. I think that's bad manners. Yeah, let's get out of that. The matter is in court. Don't overemphasize it. We banned it in line with the law. What can be done is to change that law. Number two, let us create a culture of discipline, all of us. I have a role to play to make this country work and to ensure that consumers of content are well guided. You have a role to educate, to inform, and to entertain. And all of us have something to do, Mike, and we can only achieve meaningful and sustainable development in this country if we work together. The media has a lot of influence. The media shapes opinions, it molds our kids, and we must understand, right, like now schools are closed, parents must now monitor what their children are watching, must guide them. We must have conversation that we cannot allow the TVs to now show pornography, advertise beer and condoms, because you can see that's what you are putting on the screens right now. And why are you doing it when schools are closed? It's not adults who close. It's not adults who are on holiday. It's our kids. Meaning that beer companies, condom manufacturers are targeting the kids, and they're intensifying their campaign right now so that they influence our kids in the wrong way. That's where we have a problem. It's a lack of discipline. And if you can bring these manners and say, what does the law say? There's something called the watershed period, where programs of adult nature should not show between 5 in the morning to 10 in the evening. Why don't we just stick to that? And where we need to change the law, we can come together and change the law. But right now, because schools are closed, I'm monitoring, I'm seeing a lot of beer adverts, a lot of condom adverts, and clearly the agenda is to destroy our children. Betting right now has gone just crazy. And you are targeting our children. You are not targeting adults because, like I've said, adults know where to get beer. Adults are not on holidays. Why do we intensify beer, condoms, and betting adverts during the holidays?
All right.
The agenda is to destroy the moral values of our children, and I think it's wrong. We have to have this conversation. I thank you. I am very grateful that at least we are speaking. People like Dr. Mukua can continue to help us. So that is not about government and the media. We have also society coming in to help in this conversation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ezekiel Mutua, for joining us this morning on phone and to have this discussion. And as we wind up, Dr. Mukua, your closing comments on how do we deal with this and what responsibility do we have? Because we cannot relegate and say that the media purely is to blame. We as a society also have a stake in this.
I think the question we have to raise is what's our definition of a family? What's our definition of a family? If I define my family, or if I'm able to say a family is a father and a mother and children, assuming that's one way that people don't believe in a family of father and mother. But anyhow, if I can define a family, nuclear family, as having children who will grow up to have children who have certain moral direction, compass in life. We're going to have children when they are in 30s or late 20s, whatever time they choose, at an appropriate time. If we can define what is a family, then if perhaps I use a simplistic way of explaining the same, can the end justify the means? Can we, if we define a family, the kind of family I envision where there's a moral order in a family, the children are responsible, are not running here, running there, having, enjoying themselves sexually, and, you just say, well, This is not the kind of son I want when he's in 30, when he's in 40, much as, all these freedom discussions are there. If we can define what is a family in Kenya today, in contemporary Africa today, is this the kind of family we think we want, or do we want a more Western type of family? Then I think that's where the conversation should start. Because then it will help us say, okay, if this is the family we want, this is the kind of movies we want, or this is the kind of media content we want. And it will be easy to come to a media house and say, sorry, this is not the kind of Kenyan family that we're constructing.
All right, and thank you very much, Dr. Mukua, lecturer at University of Nairobi. We also had Dr. Ezekiel Mutua, who is the Kenya Films Classification Board CEO, joining us on phone. It is now 24 minutes to 8. We're going to take a break, but do stay with us right here on Morning Express.